Amanda, welcome to the Content 10X podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Amy.
It's really, really good to have you here today. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Me too.
So before we get into the main sort of topics of the day, I'd love to ask you, Amanda, could you share a bit about your career today? So a bit of a tour of just how you've got to where you are now in your career.
Yeah. So I never set out to be a marketer. When I was in college, I was very set on, I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to be a print journalist. I'm going to be so serious and, I don't know, win awards maybe one day. So I worked fresh out of college, I worked at a digital media and tech news site called paidcontent.org. This was one of the original tech blogs. So this came out around the time TechCrunch first came out, around the time GigaOM came out. And that was really where I learned how to blog, how I learned how to write online. From there, I worked at gigaom.com by way of acquisition, had wonderful colleagues and really loved what I did. But I also felt myself plateauing. I felt like, oh, maybe I wasn't meant to be a journalist. So I had my quarter life crisis right on time, decided to go to culinary school and see, you know what, now I'm going to become a food writer. That's what I'm going to do. Only I didn't do any research on this. I just decided, I'm going to be a food writer and I need to go to culinary school to, develop some kind of clout without ever having done research on the industry. Quickly learned there are very few food writing jobs. There are 8 of them, and they are, occupied by culinary legends, right? So all people I look up to. And from there, I ended up, that was kind of how I stumbled into content marketing, because this was at a point in my life / in content marketing where I think this must have been, this was around 2012-ish. So at this point in content marketing, I think some of the most interesting blogs had kind of graduated from what is X, how to Y, and started to get more into sort of, I've heard it been called brain journalism content, where it's content marketing, but kind of rooted in journalism. So that was sort of my entryway into content marketing. So I thought, I can write things. I know how to run a blog. I can probably do this. And from there, kind of, I pitched myself to a number of different kinds of startups, mostly food related startups, and ended up finding a job at a snack startup called NatureBox. And there I, ran the blog, did some organic social media. And because of my journalism experience, ended up kind of being their de facto head of PR for a while.
Really interesting. You know what's so funny, Amanda? Honestly, every time anyone says to me, if you could do any job in the world, what would you do? I always say a food writer. Just like you. I wonder if I'm going to end up having a midlife crisis soon and I'm going to go into culinary school as well, because you telling that story made me laugh so much. I always say, I don't know, I think I'd just love to be a food writer and travel the world eating at the Michelin star restaurants of the world and just write about it. That would be my ideal job.
Would be right. That would be beautiful. I will say culinary school was a really fantastic experience, just as an experience as a whole. And I felt like it was really important for me as a young, I would say, I'm saying young adult, but I was in my 20s. But when you're in your 20s, you often feel like a kid. So I felt like a young adult. And it was really formative for me in that experience because it really challenged me physically to just do something different, right? To be on my feet for 6 hours a night, chopping things, lifting heavy things. That wasn't what I was used to. It wasn't what I came from. And also just working in a very truly fast-paced environment where everything's hot and everything's sharp and you have to be careful and people are yelling at you mostly out of necessity. It was just a very, very stark change of pace that I think was a great growing opportunity for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a high pressure environment, isn't it? And I'm sure you took like amazing skills from that, even though it wasn't something that you continue to pursue down. You take something from everything, don't you? So I'm sure there's a considerable amount of transferable skills that came from that experience too, which is cool. And then we fast forward to today, as you said, and we'll chat a bit about Sparktoro and all of that in a moment. What I wanted to jump into is the Zeroclick content. So I've seen you talk a lot about Zeroclick content online. You do a fantastic job of explaining your take on this, and I've seen you get some really wonderful engagement on social media platforms when you've had the conversations about Zeroclick content. So I guess, like, important question number one: what is Zeroclick content, and why is it important?
So Zeroclick content is publishing content to any given platform, whether it's social media, Google, email, newsletter, for which clicking to leave the platform is only additive to the user experience, not required. So there's standalone, discrete value in consuming that tweet, that thread, that 100-word LinkedIn post, where the reader who's scrolling by can realize some of that immediate value and go, oh, I understand that. Great. And can either keep going about their day, keep moving by, or they can, if they want to, click to learn more and get even more context for what that piece is about.
It's so interesting because, at Content 10X, we're a repurposing agency. So we work with businesses, and we're, like an example would be maybe slicing and dicing their longer form videos or podcasts into shorter content. And I've never actually said that, like the term Zeroclick content, but a massive thing for us is when we choose a video teaser or a quote image, but usually let's talk about short videos. A massive thing is that they must stand alone. So anyone who's worked in my team probably many times has had like the feedback comment, this doesn't stand alone, please can you find another clip that stands alone. And when we do our training, when new people come on board and things like that, a massive like part of the training is we say you must find content that stands alone, doesn't require what was said before and doesn't require what's said after to, on its own, in its own right, add value. I guess I wanted to dig into the click side of things. So what we usually do is we'll often kind of alternate. So it'll be short, snappy pieces of content that does have a call to action. So it stood alone and it added value, but there'll still be, this came from this webinar, or this came from this YouTube video. So if you want, more great tips like this or more advice like this, then here where you can go. And then we'll make sure others are just for engagement. So there literally isn't anywhere to click to. It is enjoy this and engage with it, and probably then ask a question, what do you think, or what's your opinion on that tip. What would you say in terms of adding that link at the end? So you've got that choice because it stands alone, it's Zeroclick, it doesn't need to have a link. But what would be your advice in terms of how often you should do that, and how you see it affecting the platform and people's behavior if there is actually a link to click?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question in that, well, one, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the right exact balance is. And as I produce content on some of my own top of funnel channels, I'm not always thinking about whether I should drive people to a click. Because I would say that I do publish a lot of kind of bite-sized Zeroclick content that really doesn't click out to anything else. So if I were forced to kind of put some kind of number or stat on that, I would say to try to do a sort of 50-50 exchange of, having content that includes links and then content that is truly standalone, that doesn't go anywhere. Because if nothing else, you're at least signaling to your audience that you're not always going to try to drive clicks. You're not trying to make them sign up for anything all the time, right? And I think at this point, any internet user is savvy enough to know that we all have things that we want to drive people to. Like that, like we know, like we might not know that, like that I, for instance, have a blog or a newsletter, right? But people probably know, like, oh, this person who's publishing has something that they're driving people to, whatever that is, whether it's a book, ebook, course, blog, newsletter, YouTube show, podcast, that sort of thing. So I would say to really home in on having those standalone insights, and then maybe 50-50, you click out or don't.
Yeah, yeah. And when you provide a link, so you are clicking out and you are providing a CTA to go somewhere else. Obviously, the platforms, as you already mentioned, they're not always too keen on you sending that signal to them that your intention with this post is to get them off the platform. Are there any platforms in particular that like you've noticed are worse for that than others, for diminishing maybe reach of your next post or diminishing reach of that post because you've put a link into it?
I will say I think I've seen this most in Twitter, where
Yeah.
I think Twitter is the place where you are most likely to get dinged for putting links. I think, and I don't know exactly why, right? I mean, it could just be purely because of the algorithm in which they just deprioritize content that links people out. But I've noticed that even on LinkedIn, if I add links on something, it doesn't perform as well as a post that has no links. But it also doesn't completely whiff. It's not the worst post. But sometimes for Twitter, like I'll post a link to a blog post, crickets, like it will die immediately. So I would say that. I mean, where I would be reluctant to call out Instagram or TikTok here in these instances are those platforms don't really allow you to link out in general. Like, now on Instagram, you can put links in your stories, but you don't really, that isn't as algorithm dependent as, content is on Twitter or LinkedIn.
Yeah, I agree with you. We've just ran fairly small tests, but when you do use the links in stories, we find that it's quite hard to ignore statistics that show that you get diminished reach. You'll get like a certain amount of reach on all these posts, and the ones where you do use the link feature, lo and behold, you get a slightly more diminished reach. And also on LinkedIn, I 100% agree with you about Twitter. I just wondered like what you thought, and I agree with you on Twitter, but I think LinkedIn is sometimes a bit of a sort of funny one about your links as well, which is why people often say like link in the first comment and things like that, because they're trying to get around getting that link into the, the post.
The funny thing about that though, with putting the link in the comments, and I definitely do this too for LinkedIn, is it seems to work, right? It seems to actually work and boost yourself in the algorithm, but it makes for a bad user experience. Because there are times when I, as a consumer, I'm scrolling through that I think I want to click on this thing. And now if I expand the comments, it doesn't even show the linked post first. I see all these other, all the other people's comments, which I was like, no, but I'm looking for the link. So that I find strange. And I suppose you had to like look into this more, but I find it strange in that it is something that seems to objectively perform better for creators. However, it is a poorer user experience.
Yeah, it's an unusual then, isn't it? Because the platform then end up, as you said, they end up like kind of prioritizing and I suppose rewarding a behavior that creators have worked around that gives it less of a user experience, when what they were actually trying to do is improve the user experience by, I suppose, and their experience of keeping people on the platform. That's not 100% about the user, is it? With Zeroclick content, I think what can be a bit scary for people is the thought of freely giving away value, without with like less measurable ability to track the ROI. So if it's like Zeroclick content, there's no CTA to go anywhere else, and I suppose really you're therefore trying to optimize for impressions and engagement on the platform. Do you find that as well, like that there can be a feeling of this is a bit scary because I'm all about the measurement and I'm all about tracking ROI, and perhaps like just impressions or engagement on a platform isn't going to give me enough of that trackable ROI to how this is going to help my business from a content marketing perspective?
Yeah, I mean, and this is something a lot of people have asked me as well. Like, well, how do I make the case to my CEO for creating this kind of content if we can't even track conversions? Which is absolutely a fair question. But the way that I think about it is, and we'll take the example of if you were to do like 50-50 of links and no links to your top of funnel content. The way that I kind of make this case is for each time that you are maximizing for impressions or optimizing for impressions, not linking people out, right? You keeping people on platform and engage on that platform, you are essentially building up your algorithmic capital, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. The more that you get people to engage with your content, the more likely your content will be served up again the next time. So I think of it as building up capital, right? You're building up impressions, high engagement, whatever. And then you burn a little bit of that capital by linking out to your blog or website or, whatever landing page you might have. And that is ultimately what's going to better drive conversion. If you build up the algorithmic capital and then slowly burn it in little chunks, then you're going to be more likely to convert people over time. And so that's one way to look at it, like the sort of algorithmic conversion, optimized way to look at it. But there's also on the brand side, you're building affinity with people, right? You're building trust because you're showing that obviously people know you're selling something, right? If whatever industry, and obviously you're selling, whether it's a service, software, whatever. But you're showing that that's not the only thing you care about, right? You're showing like, here, I'm giving free value. By the way, sign up for our webinar or listen to our podcast. And at that point, you're also going to build this sort of affinity with fans or followers who are going to think, all right, that's fair. Like this person has been providing so much value, freely through their LinkedIn posts, reels, whatever, that I get it. Ultimately they're promoting a podcast or a YouTube show, and it's totally fair that they would drive us to that.
Yeah. And I also think that, from that content marketing perspective, we often think that the goal is that we want to get, people, fans of our short form content, because they're more likely to initially spend time with us in shorter, snappier ways. And then, like you said, they might eventually then migrate over to the podcast because they've been really finding your tweets great or your like Instagram reels great. And then they'll get to the podcast and then they'll start their longer form content, and then they'll inquire, like, we must get them from short to long form to inquiry and sale. But actually it's not the case, is it? Because there's plenty of people who will never consume your longer form content. They're just not that kind of person. They're never going to sit down and watch your 30-minute YouTube videos, or they're never going to listen to your podcast. But for them, like, the trust is built up enough through being an avid fan of your Instagram reels or your Twitter threads. They become such a fan of the shorter content, and that moves them through to wanting to work with you, trusting you, and all of that as well. So that's another thing, isn't it? It doesn't have to be short to long to sale, does it? We can go short, trust, like inquiry, sale, can't we?
Yeah, exactly.
At Sparktoro, so you guys create lots of like awesome content. I wanted to just like dig into that a little bit in terms of the decisions that you've made over your content marketing strategy and where you focus your time. It's one of the main areas of focus for you, the office hours that you do, or like how does that work in terms of your content pyramid and strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that at the moment, office hours kind of sits at the center of all this.
Yeah,
and it wasn't very intentional. I mean, the original intent of office hours was, we have a lot of customers who have questions about our product or prospects who have questions about our product. We should have some kind of educational series to help them realize more value from the Sparktoro platform, right? That's kind of that's why everybody starts a webinar series, right?
Yeah.
So that was why we started it. We called it office hours. The idea being that we would do some kind of short presentation that showed people how to get better utility out of Sparktoro, and people can bring their questions and we can do some quick little demos real time. And that's what we do. Of course, a couple of times we've gone a bit off the rails and have just talked about kind of overall marketing strategy. And then occasionally I'm like, oh, I forgot the Sparktoro part. We got to put that in. So that was kind of the idea of that. And we started out by doing this every other week or so. So about twice a month. This was in 2021. And then over this past year, 2022, we've been scaling it down to about once a month or so, just because we've had a great backlog of content created. We've also sort of wanted to focus more on writing on the blog and producing our virtual summit, which was just, last week or so. So we kind of put some more resources behind that. And so I would say where the strategy is with office hours today is I think about it like, how can multiple types of content or channels kind of feed or nurture office hours? So I might publish a Twitter thread or a LinkedIn post about any given topic to kind of see if people like the idea, right? Like maybe I'll do a rant on cold outreach. I'm like, I don't like the way people are doing cold outreach. I have a strong opinion for how people should do it, and I'll publish this. And I'm like, here's some advice. And I'll kind of see what people think about that. So I guess that's an example of Zeroclick content, right? Like having this sort of a shorter form piece about here's my quibble with the status quo. Here's how I think people should do it. Here's some advice for doing that thing. And then kind of based on whatever reception I get from that, like if people respond to it well, if people seem to have a lot of questions or comments, from there, I think, okay, this idea has legs. Like clearly people are talking about this thing. What can I do next? So from there, from there, we turn this into an office hours series because then I was like, well, clearly people want more about this topic and they're engaged with this. Let's do an office hours webinar episode where we basically take the ideas from this Twitter thread and expound on them, make them better, and then show people how to use Sparktoro to improve the quality of their cold outreach. So we did that in the office hours. And because I was quick to get up that registration page, I was able to add that onto my Twitter thread to be like, if you want to learn more, sign up for our webinar. We got people to sign up. I think we had around 800 signups for this webinar.
Wow.
Performed very well.
Amazing.
Did the webinar, right, where it was like, here's the advice. And then, of course, that's another opportunity to get more feedback from attendees, like people in the chat asking questions, submitting them in the Q&A, even just hearing from Rand, like seeing him react real time. That gives me more feedback to continue to further refine the thought. And then after that, I took my learnings from the slide deck and the feedback that I got and refined that further into a blog post. So if you were to like look up cold outreach Sparktoro, you'd probably find all these resources. And now it's like codified in this 2,000 word blog post or so, in which the office hours webinar is also embedded. So Brilliant. It's sort of like, here's this post. If you want to like listen to a version of this blog post, it wasn't me reading it, right? If you want to listen to or watch the presentation version, you can, or read this post. So this was a nice way to sort of use office hours as the center of this strategy where we're, testing a validated idea, receiving feedback real time, iterating on it, and then publishing it into a written piece that it kind of stands a test of time.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I love the first example, at the start, like you said, testing the idea with the thread. It's something that I've done a few posts on called like a content MVP. It's like the minimum viable product, but like the content. So you do your MVP and you see the response and then you build the product. So I've done a few episodes on that. But no, I absolutely love that. What a great example of like you said, like the first thread was Zeroclick content at first, like because there was nothing to click to. It was literally just like testing the reaction, testing people's opinions. So you were able to quickly then get when you sorted out the webinar, I'd sneak in the click for that at the end. But it was Zeroclick content getting all of that opinion, and it's just wonderful. Then you did a like completely useful targeted office hours, because it was, like you said, completely based on responding off your audience and then leading on to the blog post. I'm keen to know, so you had a blog post that you said is evergreen, like it's useful, stand the test of time, and you've got the video in there as well. Did you do anything further? So was there did it feature in your newsletter? Like, did the article or a summary of it? Did you do a follow-up thread about it, or slice and dice the webinar? Like, I'd love to know, is there anything more that you did from that one?
I don't think there is, but I probably should have, and I probably still can. I mean, I've taken some principles from that and repurposed it into newsletter content, but I've not done like a follow-up thread.
Yeah, like you said though, there's always time to do repurposing. You don't always have to do repurposing in the moment like that, and it can be good to continue to see, how well that content performs before spending more time on the repurposing. So that makes sense, but it's still a really fantastic example. Don't want to wrap up the conversation without just talking a little bit about Sparktoro, because as you know, I had Rand on the podcast a little while ago, 2021, and had a wonderful conversation about Sparktoro and about, how it works. And for anybody, who didn't listen to that episode and would love to know a little bit more about it, and I guess there's probably been updates ever since I spoke to Rand. Well, 100% there will have been. Could you just explain a little bit more to the content marketers listening right now, just on like Sparktoro?
Yeah, thank you. So Sparktoro helps you as a founder, marketer, entrepreneur, helps you find your audience's sources of influence. So it would be the social accounts they follow, podcasts they listen to, YouTube channels they subscribe to, and more recently, the Reddits or subreddits that they also frequent. So you can do this search by way of how people might self-identify, which works quite well, especially in B2B, because a lot of people would publicly self-identify as like marketing director or CEO. So that's one way you can search for your audience. You can also search based on social accounts that they follow, or websites they frequent, or hashtags that they use. So perhaps if you're trying to market to teachers, you might want to, search for this audience by doing a Sparktoro search for my audience uses the hashtag education week or things like that. So from there, it's sort of sky's the limit, right? So you can use this to inform your cold outreach or find people to reach out to. You could also use this to sort of inform the how of your content marketing strategy. So where keyword research can tell you the keywords that people are searching for, keyword research won't tell you who is searching for them or why. But in Sparktoro, you can see the topics that people are talking about online. And you can see like, oh, okay, I can see that marketing directors over the past couple months have been talking about email marketing. That's interesting. I wonder if there's an email marketing trend that I should keep an eye out for. So that's something that keyword research wouldn't tell you. You can also use it to do your PR pitches. What else? Find new social accounts to follow, and then just better keep up in your industry.
Yeah, and if you have something like a podcast, you can get good ideas for new and interesting guests within your industry and things like that. I find it really useful. I find it's really interesting what you said about finding out more about what they're thinking and who they are, because with search you can find out at that point in time what somebody is thinking, but you don't know anything about them. But then with social, you can find out everything about a person, but you don't know anything about what they're thinking. And then with Sparktoro, kind of closes the gap of just feeling like you know more about these audiences, like what they're thinking, who they are, like where they hang out, what they like, it gives you a really strong feeling of understanding your audience, more so that I think than some of those other more like just more narrow ways of understanding what do they type in Google, or what demographic features do they have on a social platform. But it just helps you really more deeply understand, for whatever reason you need to understand more about a group of people, I guess, isn't it? It might not necessarily be, like we said, like audience research for marketing purposes. It could be, peers in your industry for event, like finding speakers, finding, all sorts of things. Yeah. So
yeah, absolutely.
And in terms of like the Reddit feature, that just jumped out to me. That recently new. That sounds,
Yeah.
that
So
sounds
this
really
was
cool.
over the past, past 2 months or so, we launched this. So now you can find the fastest growing subreddits within your audience. So that's been super interesting and fun to explore because Reddit data has been so hard for marketers to find. And I think, most marketers, or maybe a lot of marketers, find Reddit marketing intimidating, right? Because Reddit is just a very special and unique social community where it is truly a community, right? It's very interest or topic based. It's not really person centric, right? We're like on Twitter, you kind of follow influencers or people within the niche, but Reddit's like you follow topics or interests that you really passionately care about. And so it has a very strong community element. And, a lot of the most upvoted answers tend to be the ones that are most nuanced or very detailed. So it's a very special community to market in. And I'm putting market in air quotes because it's not the place where you would just go in and say, hey, everyone, try out Sparktoro. Like you would never do that, right? You would go in and lead with that value of like, hey, here's a great way to, learn more about your audience. I would go to these other subreddits and, all those other good stuff. You would never lead with your product pitch.
No, you'd probably get in trouble on Reddit if you did that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful place to find out what people are talking about, isn't it? So when you're doing, for example, content research and you're looking at your audience, what are they sort of tweeting about and what are they Instagramming about? But like Reddit really gives you a good idea of what people, because you follow those interests and people go quite deep on Reddit. So on Sparktoro, could you put in like a podcast that your audience really like to listen to, and it will tell you potentially the subreddits that audience may also be involved in, like following?
Somewhat. So you can't search in Sparktoro based on podcasts. What you can do is if the podcast host has some sort of social following, you can search for my audience follows a social account and then the podcast host's social account. And then from there, find the influential Reddits.
That's really cool. And I have to check that out.
Yeah.
No, it's really good because I often think that Reddit is an overlooked channel for having conversations and for understanding more deeply about what's going on with your industry and your audience. So that's really cool. Amanda, it's been such a fantastic conversation. We've talked about various different things, and I know that the audience are just going to really, really have a great time listening to this conversation. In terms of, I guess, kind of like one sort of final question, what would you say is the biggest mistake that you see people making when they're almost following like the opposite of Zeroclick content? So if Zeroclick content is like really like what we should follow, what's the biggest enemy of it? What's the biggest mistake people make that in terms of like the opposite?
I think the biggest mistake people make today is using the marketing tactics that worked 12 years ago. So this would be like using kind of overplayed teasers like, want more leads? Check out our webinar to learn how, where it's, yeah, of course I want more leads. Like, what do you think? Or it's want to learn how to write the best headlines? I mean, sure. I mean, like, of course I would want to know how to write the best headlines. But that kind of played out teaser type of content doesn't work so well anymore, unless you find a way to make that teaser especially like fresh and novel, which is a very rare skill, right? I think maybe more successful today, the version, instead of teasers, you would do like a hot take that you can back up or expound on in the greater context of the long form podcast or a research report that you did.
I completely agree with you, and just, great. And what's a shame is people who invest in content marketing courses and things like that are still teaching these methods from 2012 or earlier as well, because sometimes people can't help but they're just being taught such outdated ways as well, aren't they, which always kind of really annoys me. Thank you so much, Amanda. It's been such a wonderful conversation. In terms of connecting with you, where would you like people to go?
Yeah. So you can find me on my personal site, amandanat.com. I have a newsletter there. I also am on LinkedIn and on Twitter as Amanda Nat.
And I highly recommend everybody must connect with Amanda on LinkedIn and Twitter, because she posts such fantastic content. Often when there's polls of who is the person to follow in content marketing, Amanda is usually the first person people say, or high up there. So just go follow Amanda on those social platforms for sure, and check out the newsletter, of course. I'll put the links to everything in the show notes. So thank you again, Amanda. It's been awesome. So yes, enjoy the rest of your day.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Amy. Have a great night.
Thank you.